Hey everyone, welcome to a new series on using Unity Engine. In this series we'll be using Unity 3D and we're still focused on complete beginners to the Unity platform. So the first thing we're going to do is start up a new project. When we open Unity, this is the screen you should see, and you'll have an option up here depending on what version you have to create a new project or hit open. Now I'm using 2017.4.16, but 99% of everything we're going to be doing here will apply to any version of Unity because we'll be focused on just the basics. So I'm going to hit new and these options should come up. So we will be using 3D, so make sure 3D is selected. Give your project a name. We'll be making a simple first-person shooter, so I'm just calling mine a first-person shooter. Probably don't need two S's there. And choose the folder where you want to save it to. Okay, once that's done, let's just click on Create Project. And this might take 30 seconds or so. Okay. Now your screen won't look exactly like this. You'll probably look something like this, and that's fine. So a brief description of the interface. On this area, we have something called a hierarchy, and in the hierarchy, you're going to see all the objects that you drag into the game. So all the cameras, all the lights, all your 3D models, all your sounds, everything like that. So the hierarchy, it's important to remember that name. Down here, you have your project folders, and you also have a tab where you can go into the console. So in your project folders, you'll be able to right-click and create other folders or also other files like scripts, scenes, and things like that. We'll get into more details about each of those as we go along. Up here, you have your 3D world space. At the moment, it has nothing in it except that main camera and that directional light. Let's just ignore those for now. But you have a couple of tabs up here. You won't have animator actually, so I'll close that. You'll probably have scene, game, and asset store. So scene is where we do all the modifications and stuff in our 3D world. So we can drag things around, move lights, move cameras around, shape the terrain, things like that. Inside of game is where we're going to be testing. So when we press play up here, it will open up our world in the game and we'll be able to walk around it and test everything out. And then you have an asset store where we'll be getting a lot of our assets from. So pre-made models and things like that. And then on this end, you have something called the inspector. And the inspector just holds a whole bunch of properties and options for all the objects that you have here in the hierarchy. For example, if I click on main camera, all the options for the main camera will come up here in the inspector. And same with directional light, it'll change to the directional light. So all your 3D models will have their own properties, and you'll see those all in the inspector. Now, that's the basics of the interface. I'm just going to put in some quick assets that we're going to be using throughout the project. So if you go to Assets, under Import Package, there's a few packages here that come with Unity by default in almost all versions of Unity. If you have Unity Education version or something like that, it might not show up here, but just leave a comment or send me a message and I'll be able to get the package for you. But here, the first thing we're going to do is import this characters package. And we can do that just by clicking on it. And Unity is going to prepare all the files. And all these options come up. They're all selected by default. So we're just going to import all of them into our project. Excellent. So you can see now in our project folders that in our assets subfolder, they've added something called standard assets. And if I open that, I have a whole bunch of characters, platforms, etc. that I'm going to be using soon. Cool. Now, up here in the hierarchy, you have a couple of tools that you'll be using a lot. I'm just going to go through them quickly. This first one here is called the Move tool. And if I click on any of the objects in my scene, or even in the hierarchy, it'll select it. And it will show this 3-directional arrow thing called a gizmo. And you see how when I move my mouse around it, it highlights yellow? That just means that I can only move in that direction. So this, you can see in the inspector, that our position, our rotation, and our scale all have certain values attached to it. So if I wanted to, I can move everything in this area. Now, watch when I move this camera. If I move only up, I'm only changing the y-axis. If I move only in and out, I'm only changing the z-axis. And if I move that way, I'm only changing the x-axis. Now, if I wanted to move in 2 axes, right, I can select these little squares here. And this way I'm only moving in x and y, but z is staying locked. On the red one, I'm only moving in z and y, but x is staying locked. And in this bottom one, I'm only moving in x and z, but y is staying locked. Now, this next one is called rotate. Now, if you just watch this, these rotation values here in the inspector, I can rotate that way, and I can rotate also in the z and axis, so similar thing. I just click on the arrow. Sorry, I just click on the line that I have colored yellow, and I should be able to move in that plane only. Rotate in that plane only, sorry. Or you can just do it here in the X, Y, and Z if you'd rather do it by number. There's some things that's easier to do by number, and there's some things that would probably be better doing in the world, just for some fine-tuning, testing out angles and stuff. So I'm going to reset that back by just changing these X, Y, and Z coordinates all back to 0. Cool. The camera. And then we have the scale. So if I'm going to scale this light. Same thing. You have an X, Y, and Z scale. The lights don't really scale, but if we had another object in there, you'd be able to see it. Scaling just makes it larger or smaller. So you can scale in one side only, or you can scale in all directions by going for that middle cube selector. Now this final one is called the rect tool. You won't be using that too much just yet. I've only really used it a lot in 2D. Otherwise, you'd probably just use scale. Cool, so that's a basic explanation of the interface. Now, I'm just going to save the game so that the next sections are pretty easy. And I'll start by right-clicking and creating a folder that I'm going to call Scenes. And same thing down here, I'm going to also create a folder called Scripts. And we'll add other folders as we go. But up here where it says Untitled with an asterisk, that's the scene name. So the scenes are kind of like levels in Unity, or maybe rooms if you've used like GameMaker or something like that before. And we can save it just by saving the scene. So I'll save the scene, I'll save it inside my scenes folder, and I'll just call this Open World 1. And I'll hit save. Excellent. And now if you go into scenes, you can see that's what a icon for a scene looks like. Excellent, now that's all done. I'll see you in the next video.